So today's talk is on the five hindrances, something we talk about often. And I'm going to cite two suttas, I think. If I get through the first one, I'll get to the second one. The first one is called the Avarana Sutta, and the second is the Nibbana Sutta. Nibbana means, as far as the Buddha's Dhamma is concerned, the awakened state. Nibbana, actually, the translation is extinguished, meaning that the fires of passion, of craving for sensual fulfillment and constant distraction have been extinguished. And that's the whole purpose of the Buddha's Dhamma, to recognize that we create all the confusion, stress, and disappointing experiences of constantly grasping after things that are only a distraction from understanding the true nature of who we are. So these hindrances are first significant in our Dhamma, in our meditation practice, meaning if they're not managed there, we won't be able to develop a meditation practice because they are a hindrance to that, an obstacle to that. But then off our cushions, being mindful of these hindrances as they arise in our moment-by-moment life is a clear indication that in that moment, we are immediately engaging in I-making. We are distracting. We're acting out of a fabricated view. And again, being mindful of these five hindrances is a good way of just keeping that in check. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. This is from the Avarana Sutta. On one occasion, the Buddha was near Savatthi in Jita's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. He addressed those gathered. Friends, there are five hindrances that overwhelm mindfulness and weaken wise discernment. Sensual desire is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. It's a completely accurate statement to say that any distraction during meditation is rooted in sensual desire in one way or another. It might not necessarily mean that we're distracted by the piece of chocolate cake we had just before we sat down. Any distraction within our ongoing thought process is rooted in sensual desire, isn't it? The sensual feeling of our own thoughts and being attached to those thoughts. This is very, very subtle, but that is that's the depth of subtlety that we've been talking about all these weeks with the teachings on jhana and the deepening levels of meditative absorption. We can't get there if we are preoccupied or distracted by our hindrances. And when we start recognizing, when we've developed a measure of concentration initially, that we're able to simply recognize these hindrances, that's part of what is mentioned in the teachings on jhana as directed thought. And so initially we are, as we're deepening our concentration, we become mindful of, well, geez, I just spent the last 5 minutes or 20 minutes thinking about chocolate cake or that book that I've been reading, and getting caught up in the intellectuality of that, if that's a word. In meditation, we simply recognize that distracted state rooted in sensual desire and come back to our breath. That is the way that we recognize, diminish, and ultimately abandon each and every hindrance. It's not by analyzing that. It's not by embracing them. The reason why I'm saying this is a lot of modern schools talk about embracing your doubt or embracing your fear or embracing this or embracing that. Embracing is simply more I-making, isn't it? It's more ownership of something rather than recognizing that it's a fabrication, and simply come back to the sensation of breathing and let it go. Off our cushions, we're training ourselves to, again, not indulge these hindrances to the point of continuing our own ignorance. Is that clear? So that really is the whole point of all this, and we can go home now. Friends, there are five hindrances that overwhelm mindfulness and weaken wise discernment. Sensual desire is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. Ill will is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. Most people, when they hear about ill will, they think about ill will as something that they're projecting onto other people. We're angry at someone, or maybe even worse than that. But the more subtle level of ill will is the ill will that we hold against ourselves. And if we can ever get this one book done, many years ago, I started a book about the underlying cause of ignorance is manifested universally as a very subtle form of self-loathing. I'm not good enough. I need more to make me complete or happy or safe and secure. That's what motivates grasping after sensual desire, is this underlying belief that there's something missing in me, or there's something broken in me. That's self-loathing, isn't it? And the Buddha teaches that all of that is a fabrication. No matter what those fabrications caused us to do in this life. And this is not to excuse responsibility for our actions. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's a way of taking complete responsibility and deeply understanding the cause of our actions. So a good example would be Angulimala, the murderer, who the Buddha met. Well, I'm not going to get into the whole story. Met him on the road, realized who he was, taught him the Dhamma, and very quickly, Angulimala, the murderer, never murdered again. So the point of that is the very extreme behavior provoked within Angulimala by his own hindrances did not preclude him from developing the Dhamma, in fact, developing it instantly. It also is a profound teaching on karma, which is often misapplied, that there's a one-to-one relationship between poor deeds and the amount of suffering that we have to pay. It's just not true. When we awaken, we've achieved Nibbana, which, if I get to the other sutta today, all of those, to put it in religious terms, all of those sins are also extinguished because we're not holding on to them. There's nothing to provoke our own suffering. The third hindrance, laziness and drowsiness, is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. And that's certainly applicable directly to our meditation practice, where we excuse away our daily half-hour sessions twice a day because we're too busy, it's too boring, whatever it might be. That's an aspect of laziness, isn't it? And what's the solution to laziness? Anybody? What's the solution? What's the resolution to laziness? All the time. It works 100% of the time. Nobody knows. Do something. Take action. And in this case, it means to meditate. And drowsiness is another aspect of this. Often, especially beginning meditators, but even long-term meditators, I've talked to people about this. A resistance to what's developing in meditation is often felt like physical drowsiness. You're just too tired to go on. And if you may even find yourself falling asleep rather than meditating. The first thing to check, obviously, is that you're getting enough sleep and you're not truly physically tired. And then recognize that that's a fallback position that a mind rooted in ignorance will develop to continue ignorance. It's the perfect escape from meditation, isn't it? Sleeping is not meditation. It's another reason why I recommend that we don't meditate right before we go to bed. We do it earlier in the evening.
John, if anybody's really too busy to meditate once a day, then they need to meditate twice a day.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And that's so true. And if you think you are, I was talking to a rather new student the other day, and he just said, I'm having so much time doing this for 5 minutes. I said, and I put it this way. I said, do you think that if someone told you that you would gain great benefit if you just sat down and be quiet for 5 minutes and be mindful of your breath, putting it in slightly different tone? Well, anybody can do that, right? But when you create a formal structure of something and you see it as taking you away from tonight's reruns of Law and Order, you're going to struggle to sit there for 5 minutes, won't you? It all has to do with that right intention, right effort, and developing the framework of the Eightfold Path to guide it. And there's really no reasonable excuses for not meditating, except we understand them all. It's just resistance rooted in ignorance and the desire to continue that. The next hindrance is restlessness, and anxiety is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. So restlessness and anxiety are kind of the same thing. An extreme form of restlessness leading to anxiety, building to further distraction, is clinical anxiety, isn't it? But it all begins in that restlessness and worry about something. Ultimately, it's worry that I'm not going to get what I need to be happy or survive. Again, it's that same aspect of clinging and craving rooted in sensual desire for continued establishment of me in the world.
No, I disagree with that with anxiety, because anxiety is a real biological problem. I mean, it's chemicals, and that leads to the worry. It's not the other way around. Anxiety, that's due to a chemical imbalance.
Yeah, we could, maybe one day we will. I look at that slightly differently, and because I think that pardon me?
If you're really having anxiety.
Oh yeah, I've been on medication for it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into the whole story of what anything we do, and I think you'll agree with this. Anything we do has an effect on the chemical balance in our brain. That's the way our brain is an electrochemical machine.
Yeah.
And so anything we do affects that machine. And years and years of restlessness and anxiety that builds will change the chemical structure of our brain that eventually may require something to readjust that chemical balance.
I don't know if that's the case or not. It could be genetics. It could be something you ate. There's a gut-brain connection. It could be a lot of things.
Yes, it certainly could be. And so ultimately the manifesting cause of anxiety is not what's so significant in relation to Dhamma practice. If you're going to your medical psychiatrist, he doesn't care about, or she doesn't care about Dhamma practice at all because it's irrelevant. In the framework of the Dhamma, we can look at it that anxiety, even as it has developed to the point of a chemical imbalance, is still rooted in ignorance of the way things are. In other words, the brain wouldn't have become chemically imbalanced if the initial ignorance wasn't there. And I also agree that there's a genetic component. Well, I could really get lost in that. But the genetic component does not predispose everyone to the same result. I'm one of a long line of unsuccessful drunks. We have the genetic component towards drunkenness. But not everyone in my family is a drunk. Many of them are, but not all of them. But they all have the same genetic component, don't they? There's other people that had clinical anxiety in my family besides me, not all that many. But if the argument is that it's pure genetics, which doesn't hold up, then everyone in my family should be a worrisome drunk.
Well, that's not the way the genetics works. But
I know, but it doesn't. But so we can't say that it's all genetics. We can't say that it's all nature or nurture or anything. And none of that is significantly important to developing the Dhamma. Yes, Jim.
Yeah. How about environment? You grow up, you're 14, somebody in the family dies, or you have a trauma of some kind. I think that's a big factor in there.
It absolutely does.
Depending on thinking it's genes or thinking you got bad brain chemistry, how about just, a big emotional wallop?
Yeah.
That, post-traumatic stress, which is what a lot of people seem to have. And
yes. And so when the Buddha describes the nature of dukkha, he described it exactly that way. Birth is suffering. Sickness is suffering. Aging is suffering. Death is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering. Getting what you don't want is suffering. And then he would say, in short, the 5 clinging aggregates are suffering. The 5 clinging aggregates describe a human being who is lacking understanding of who he was in relation to the environment that he's in. So when something happens that they don't understand, this is true of any human being. If something big enough happens that you can't comprehend, you're going to suffer trauma, won't you? But if you understand what's occurring, no trauma will follow. And again, I'm not trying to simplify the effects of living in the world. That's what the Buddha described 2,600 years ago. He said, upon his awakening, I looked at the world, and the world is aflame with what? The fires of passion. And it's the fires of passion that cause all the trauma in our life, isn't it? And so if we can understand the underlying manifestation of it, great healing can come to that traumatic mind. But it first needs a framework to understand that. And initially, it might need some medication to get to that point. But the solution ultimately, if you really want to extricate yourself from the effects of trauma, this works. And I know that from direct experience, not just from myself, but from many, many people that I've taught and talked to. One of the things that's often overlooked in the addiction community is the PTSD that develops as a direct result of most people's addictions and the things they have to do to keep that going. And I've seen that in so many people, the classic signs of PTSD. I had them, and many other people that I work with, and not just people with addictions, people that have come through here show those signs of PTSD, maybe not as dramatic. And I'm not trying to say that the Buddha's Dhamma is the cure for all types of mental disturbance, but it is for those that wholeheartedly engage in it, along with the other things. So it was a really useful discussion. Does that bring some satisfaction?
I definitely think that the meditation practice helps regardless of the cause, but the cause sometimes cannot be, it's not, it can't be controlled.
No. Yeah, that's the short form of the Buddha's description of dukkha. Shit happens, and guess what? Personally, I insist that I must have control. And if something happens to me and I'm already of that mindset that that things are out of control, it just compounds that, doesn't it? It just reinforces the fact that I'm in this very hostile world, and I have no control over anything. Of course, most of the things we don't have control over. The one thing that we have control over is what the Buddha taught to control, our minds. And in that lies liberation and freedom.
So, I don't know if I can put this in the right words, but kind of just listening to what was happening here. So, started off with you saying that restlessness and worry is a hindrance to practice, and then something about how ultimately restlessness and worry is just kind of the same thing as sensual desire, but just sort of exaggerated.
Yep.
Right. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
No, that's right.
And then Mary saying sensual desire. Restlessness and worry actually is different because it's chemical.
If it's anxiety.
To restlessness and worry.
Right.
Yeah,
And
around, yeah.
right. Oh, okay. So when you start, I feel like when you start talking about chemicals, you're talking about phenomenon arising and passing away.
Mm-hmm.
Things that occur that we don't have control over. And so if we start to try to assign fault to that, then we're I made.
Yes.
If we're saying,
And even if it's to blame other people or
right.
the cause of my trauma is someone else, there's still I'm making it, isn't there?
Or even if you're saying it's my fault or it's not my fault that I have these chemical reactions, or that somehow it's meditation because of the restlessness and worry versus somebody not doing, that's all kind of I making.
Yeah.
It's addressed in the teachings if you can think about it all as being, we all have to deal with a mind that is predisposed to these chemicals and reactions and things that are going on within us that we don't have control over.
Yep.
And the more that we can focus on that and concentrate on that, the less likely we will be to take personally those, internal eruptions of hormones and norepinephrine and cortisol and dopamine and everything else. So
Yeah.
that's
And we don't need to know all that
Right.
in order to develop the Dhamma.
Right.
For someone who's interested, I mean, I am. I think Mary obviously is too.
I am too. Yeah.
And so I understand all of that,
Right.
but I don't conflate that with Dhamma practice. And again, from my own experience in talking with many people, there was a time in my life I was on 9 different antidepressant, anti-anxiety medications. I was walking around like a zombie. I still remember when I went to my prescribing physician and said to her, I can't do this anymore. You need to help me get off. I'm a zombie. And I still remember her. She says, if you try to get off of any of these medications, I'm no longer your doctor. And I said, okay, goodbye. And over 6 months, I probably might have been foolish, but I weaned myself off of all of them. And lo and behold, the chemical imbalance that was in my brain that caused the condition in the first place, that was rooted in years and years of drug and alcohol abuse and a lot of other fears and anxieties that were never addressed, is gone. You know, I mean, it's been 35, 40 years since I took any type of medication besides an aspirin. And there's no anxiety, and there's actually not much restlessness. So there's real issues that people face, and the Dhamma and my teaching, I hope, doesn't diminish what's occurring in the world. It's one resolution, and a very effective one if you develop it. And just to go a little bit further in this, I was just over the past few weeks, I've been speaking with. Be careful because I don't want to. I've been speaking with a Dhamma practitioner who was a victim at very young, 5 to 8 years old, of constant rape. And as their memories are coming back, incredibly brutal. And not just could be, I don't even know how to say that. As awful as something like that is, there's gradations of severity, isn't there? And this is probably as severe as it can get. And she is on medication, but she's also been diminishing her medication over time as she's developing a realistic and impersonal view of what happened. And to me, that's remarkable, that the things that caused me to get on that medication were nothing. I mean, nothing terrible was forced on me, but this person has been able to make remarkable progress in depersonalizing something that I can't even imagine that you could depersonalize. But there's real healing there too. You know,
Just to Mary's point, John, I think that there are certain types of people who are going through certain types of conditions that they can definitely study the teachings, but may not be able to go to the cushion right away. Like you wouldn't take someone who just came back from the battlefield with severe PTSD and have them meditating, because it would be more problematic for that person at that point in time.
I have, but I don't leave them alone. And I in fact, I say everything that I say right here. I said, if you're going to do this, you need to stay in touch, and you need to be part of the Sangha. And guess what? You have there's some of those types as part of our Sangha.
Some hallucinating. I just think that there has to be a weaning process with other.
No, there has to be some real reasonable cautions. And again, most meditation is just go off by yourself and do this. And I've seen people literally lose their minds, get much worse by doing that. But within the proper framework and the proper guidance, it's a path to healing. But again, you can't be left alone. But this is not a practice that you do alone, is it? Others are, but I also reinforce often that if you're going to listen to someone, if you're going to have someone be your teacher, you better know what they're teaching. Because it is we're dealing with people's minds. It's a serious thing. I try to, I think I do keep it kind of light, but it's never lost on me what we're doing here. So. If there's a need for medication, you'll never hear me say to anyone that you should stop taking anything. but I do, like this woman I just mentioned, she was hoping to get off of medication. In fact, that was her motivation to learn meditation in the first place. And again, I questioned her. I said, oh, I'm going to teach you how to meditate, but you do not listen to anybody else except your doctor as far as getting off of medication, or yourself.
Yeah.
You know,
some people are so severely mentally challenged that they need to have medications to be able to go through therapy.
oh yeah, and there's many people that have come here that could not do this because of their high levels of anxiety. They just couldn't, and you know, that's the way it is. That might seem even tragic if this was put out here as a salvation type of religion. It's not. There's no miracle cures in the Dhamma, and some people aren't able to do this. That's just the way it is. That doesn't take away its effectiveness, does it? You know, and it doesn't mean that there's something lacking. It's just not meant to be the end all to end all. It's meant for people that are interested in developing it and gain the benefits.
And those that do meditate and can take it can create an environment for someone who can't to be who they are without having us judging them or creating further situations that are negative.
Yeah, and one of the everything here that is in the Dhamma that the Buddha taught is entirely practical, including, and I mentioned it earlier, that I would never have someone like Anthony mentioned to just go sit by yourself and meditate. One of the primary characteristics of someone who is rooted in severe anxiety is their isolation. They feel that they're completely isolated from the whole world. And one of the ways that begins to change is to be part of a warm and welcoming Sangha that's well focused. It's a practical way of diminishing that isolation feeling, isn't it? And it works. So let me continue.
Yeah.
Really great discussion this morning. Place for
Support groups for people with the same disorder are also very good.
yeah, I recommend. Well, yeah, I don't want to get into the discussion of modern 12-step programs today, but they've gotten a little bit unfocused. Number 5, uncertainty is a hindrance that overwhelms mindfulness and weakens wise discernment. These are the 5 hindrances. The Buddha now says, I will provide a simile. Suppose a swift mountain river flowing unimpeded, carrying everything with it. A person builds many side channels so that the current in the middle would be dispersed and dissipated. The slowed river could not carry along everything or go far. And that's just a simile of what happens when we have lost our minds. Our minds are going in all these different directions, these different side channels. In the same way, when a person clings to these hindrances, they are weak and ineffective. In other words, our hindrances are the side channels. They're dissipating the flow of our own understanding. It is impossible for these people to understand what is for their benefit or for the benefit of others. It is impossible for these people to develop awakening and a truly noble distinction in knowledge and vision. Now suppose a swift mountain river flowing unimpeded, carrying everything with it. A person comes along and closes all the side channels. And similarly as we close the side channels of our mindlessness by developing the Eightfold Path. The middle of the river would be unimpeded and would not be dispersed and dissipated. The swift river would carry along everything and go far. In the same way, when the wise Dhamma practitioner abandons these 5 hindrances, it becomes possible for them to develop strong discernment and are effective in the development of my Dhamma. The wise Dhamma practitioner understands what is for their benefit or for the benefit of others. They understand how to develop awakening and a truly noble distinction in knowledge and vision. That's the end of the Avarana Sutta. We have plenty of time. Let me do the Nirvana Sutta. On one occasion, the Buddha was near Savatthi and Jita's Grove at Anathapindika's monastery. He addressed those gathered. Friends, be mindful of these 5 hindrances. Sensual desire is a hindrance. Ill will is a hindrance. Laziness and drowsiness is a hindrance. Restlessness and anxiety is a hindrance, and uncertainty is a hindrance. These are the 5 hindrances. In order to abandon these 5 hindrances, the wise Dhamma practitioner should develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 frames of reference. And again, that's in reference to a beginning meditation practice and a beginning jhana practice. That it is the concentration that's developed at an ever deeper level that allows us to first gain control, recognize these hindrances, and then to abandon them through a well-concentrated mind. Again, it's an inner job. It's not something we're doing outside of ourselves. But that's the initial focus of a meditator, is to not be distracted by these common hindrances that everybody has. It's the first thing to overcome. And then once we develop a level of mastery on our cushions, then we can start addressing it in our moment-by-moment mundane life. The wise Dhamma practitioner remains focused on the arising and the passing away of the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, while putting aside greed and distress in reference to worldly events. That first reference is that we remain focused on the arising and passing away of the body in and of itself, means that as we're mindful of our breath in the body, we are mindful of what's occurring in that simplest way. The arising, ardent and alert and mindful of the arising and the passing away in the body itself. That's what our breath does for us. It's an immediate and visceral experience of impermanence. Always. The wise Dhamma practitioner remains focused on the arising and the passing away of feelings in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, while putting aside greed and distress in reference to the world. So again, it's a reinforcement that this is the second foundation of mindfulness, that when our feelings arise and they're distracting us because of our hindrances, to simply recognize that it's just a feeling, not analyze it, not take it any further, not take the feeling personally, and simply come back to the sensation of breathing. And again, we're diminishing the hold that our hindrances have over us. Is that clear? By that simple exercise. And if we try to do anything else with it, in other words, get back into the analysis or the blame or anything else, the judgment of the feeling or the hindrance supporting it, we're lost in our thoughts again, aren't we? We're engaged in that sensual craving. The wise Dhamma practitioner remains focused on the arising and passing away of thoughts in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, while putting aside greed and distress in reference to worldly events. And that's in this specific sense, that last line, putting aside greed and distress in reference to worldly events. The reference is that the feeling or the thought is a reflection of clinging to worldly events. And putting aside distress means putting aside the craving and the clinging to that. And that's the directed thought and action of being mindful of the sensation of breathing as our distraction arises. That's the direct counter to that type of ongoing distraction. The wise Dhamma practitioner remains focused on the arising and the passing away of the present quality of mind in and of itself. When I say at the end of every meditation session to notice the quality of your mind, be at peace with your mind, that it's referencing that last foundation of mindfulness. It simply means that whatever is occurring in my mind at the moment, whatever quality of mind that I have, whether it's anxious or blissful or excited or whatever it might be, it's simply a temporary state and not make anything of it. In other words, don't crave after more of a pleasant mind state, and don't create aversion over what we might see as an unpleasant mind state. Why? Because we now understand impermanence and we're not taking even the quality of our mind personally. Think about that for a moment. We've trained ourselves to not take our own stuff personally. We're no longer the cause of our own agitation and distraction because we've become at peace with the present quality of our mind. And that only builds.
It's impermanence, but it's also the no self.
It's an understanding of what a self is. It's not the annihilation of self. It's simply a clear understanding of what a self is. And that's an important distinction. We're not looking for annihilation or any type of trance-like state where the self isn't observable.
Yeah.
We just don't take the self personally. And
Right.
again, to someone who's, if I said that to a group that I've never been here before, they'd run out of here. So that man is talking nonsense. But you understand what that means. And that's an important point of insight or introspection. That this isn't annihilation. The fact that my views of self are rooted in ignorance doesn't mean that there's not something here that's real and viable and living a life.
It's just not me.
It's just not a fabricated me. It's an authentic me. It's a me that is able to stay mindfully present with its own life as life occurs without the need for it to be any different than it is. And just to make that point, if you can live that way, and again, not everybody can get to that point, but if you can, there's nothing to be restless or anxious or craving about, is there? Jay, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw something in here. Everybody throughout history has had somebody, Mongols are beating down the door, the Cossacks are coming. I think that right now in our society, with our politics, I don't want to dwell on politics, I think we're all carrying a heavy load because of all this stuff that's going on right now. It's unusual. It's the amount of different social changes that are being kicked around, things that just weren't brought up. I think that we all have a heavy load to get by. When you're talking about basic anxiety, where did it come from? It's because you turn on the TV or you read the paper. It's rough. Now you're giving us some good tools here to try and get by it, but I think that we all have a more complicated life than somebody did in Buddhist time. I mean, they still had people killing people just because they were in the neighborhood or because they weren't exactly alike. But it's just, we have such a large volume of stuff all the time. You go to the YMCA, they have TV screens there.
Now you're hitting on it, Jay. Yeah. The problem isn't that there's more problems today. There may be, but that's a distraction from the real problem. The problem is, and you mentioned we're all carrying a heavy load. That's by choice. Nobody has to carry anything unless they choose to identify with it, cling to it. You can live in the world and you can see what's occurring right now much more clearly if you don't take it personal. In fact, I would say that's the problem. And again, I don't want not to get into a political thing because I don't want to do that here. Yeah. But the problem is that we have now elevated the observation of dukkha to a moment by moment distraction, and the world is clinging to it, and that's all that we see, and that's all that we want to focus on. And guess what you get when that's what the focus, you feel like you're carrying the burden of the world on you. Yeah. But it's only because of your attachment to it.
And also the thing that many of us hope to affect change in it. Lisa and I went to a demonstration last night in Rosetown about things and whatnot. And, we are creatures, at least us, of the 60s, and when we see something socially going wrong, we think that we should get involved. So it's a lot like a lot of these things. There's two sides to it. Many more than two sides. But,
wouldn't the key also be to be able to get involved in the moment you're there, and then leave it? Yeah.
Well, sure, that is. Even if you're going to do something like that, if you can get involved in a impersonal way, at least you won't be contributing to a problem. But again, I don't want to get into it. It seems like the idea of peaceful protest has gone away because the individuals think that they are the saviors of the world, and everybody that doesn't agree with them is evil. And so we can justify beating the hell out of people that don't agree with us. I get into something like that young journalist that got the hell beat out of him, almost got killed from the Antifas that felt justified in beating him up. And they also beat up a poor old man at the same thing. I'm not saying you did that. I'm sure it didn't happen in Doylestown, but that's where that type of engagement leads to. When you think that you are morally right and superior, rather than understanding that the focus of your hatred should be an understanding of the ignorance that gives rise to that poor behavior on something that doesn't agree with me. People aren't bad or evil. They're rooted in ignorance. And I didn't want to get into it. If we're going to be Dhamma practitioners, we should be willing to be complete Dhamma practitioners. In other words, take that into all areas of our lives. I think, and I'm not saying you do this or anybody in this room, but I've noticed that many people, in fact, I'll take this into many people that might be religious based, meaning they have a strong moral basis for their living their lives, throw it out the window when someone disagrees with them on something like this. And they put all their love and compassion that their prophets might have taught them and insist that that doesn't apply right now because I hate that person and I'm allowed to hate because of my beliefs. Where does it come from? It comes from ignorance. So again, I don't want to get into that political speech because it's what's going on, but what's occurring today and the problems that are occurring today are exactly the same as they were 2,600 years ago. We're just too focused on them. Just to make the point, immigration has been a problem in this country for years and years and years. The problem today is no different than it was 40 years ago. And it's a problem that hasn't been resolved because nobody wants to really face it. But the issue is the same. In fact, it really is the amount now that we're concerned about, aren't we? And the immediacy of it, but the issue is still the same. And I could go too far with that. Sorry about getting sidetracked into that. The Buddha continues, the wise Dhamma practitioner should develop these 4 foundations of mindfulness, these 4 frames of reference, in order to abandon these 5 hindrances. That's the end of the Nibbana Sutta. Thank you for listening. And again, just to tie it back into all these difficulties that we see in the world, not to simplify it, but if people would address and eliminate the hindrances, there wouldn't be any of this in the world, would there? None of it. And it wouldn't be righteous and self-righteous people fighting other righteous and self-righteous people. Why? Because we'd rest in understanding. That's the solution. It's the Buddha awakened, made that statement, and that statement is still true today. I've heard a lot of people that have, even in this room, not so much lately, but in past years, it said the 4 noble truths are simply irrelevant to the severe problems today. I don't think there's anything more relevant. It just means we haven't applied it. You can't blame the method for the fact that it hasn't resolved anything. There's been no application of it. That's all. But again, the Dhamma is not, the more people that adapt and develop the Dhamma, the more peace there will be in the world. But that's not even the point. Again, the Buddha didn't see himself as a savior. Excuse me. And this is an important point. Because of the 3 marks of existence, and this is what we're going to get into in a few weeks. I know I've been threatening it. But I'm still working on the outline. And as I started doing it, I realized how important this is. And I want to have the outline done before I start teaching it on the 3 marks of existence, because this is what this is all about. The resolution, if we really, you hear me say this all the time, if we're really concerned about other people, we would take a path that leads directly to understanding why people are so aggressive towards each other, why we fall into ideologies that we think are worth defending to the point of violence or to the point of frustration and anger and hatred. It's okay to have a certain view, isn't it? Whether it's liberal, progressive, conservative, communist, it doesn't matter. I'm entitled to whatever view I want, aren't I? But the problem comes when I say you have to believe it. No matter how wonderful it might be or how wonderful I think it might be, no matter how wonderful I think it might be for the whole world to think as I do. I'm in trouble if I think that, aren't I? And that's what leads to the strife in the world.
Amen.
Okay. Thank you.
Amen. Here, here.
And the remarkable thing is that it works. It works. We can develop a calm and peaceful mind that is unwavering. It's unaffected by anything, by any news broadcast, by any individual. Nothing can affect it. And it's entirely up to us to develop that for ourselves. If we're really upset with how the world is making us feel, stop letting the world make you feel a certain way. Take back your mind. Because the world can only affect you to the extent that you let it and cling to it. We invite this into our minds and into our lives. It's a view that is inconsistent with the Dhamma. I'm not saying it's not a reasonable view in the world, but it's inconsistent with the Dhamma to think that the solution is fixing something out there. And I don't mean to be so excited about it. This has not.
You also say, and so be gentle with yourself.
Yes, what I'm saying is that this isn't what I'm talking about now. Isn't the immediate problem with what's going on in the world today? It's the ongoing, established problem of ignorance in the world. And
It's frustrating.
yeah, maybe the way, maybe this is the way I will present it in the future. If we're going to put a lot of effort into fixing social ills, which is not a bad thing to do, we should do it mindfully, and we should first, or at least concurrently, address the conflict within ourselves. And doesn't that make sense? If I want to end the conflict in the world, I'll root out the conflict in my own mind first. And then there might be peaceful protests. There might be people that can actually get their voice heard because they're not engaging in things motivated out of hatred and anger, out of peace and understanding.
And you will be much more effective.
Yeah, and again,
If you
yes,
Are not
if you
adversarial.
are not, if you're mindful and you're doing this, regardless of what you're doing to try to make a change, if you're doing it from a Dhamma-esque viewpoint that is totally where you're coming from, you're gonna be tons more effective
and you'll have
than you would be if you were just doing it from a mindless state.
people will respond to you that way.
That's right.
Because you're meeting them on their level. You're not nobody's going to listen to anybody else that's judging them in some way. You just shut down. It's just human nature. Somebody's telling you you're a piece of garbage, you're not going to listen to much more of what they have to say. As opposed to saying, you know, I think differently about this, but I'm sincerely interested in why you feel the way you feel. We used to do that to a certain extent, even in our politics, but I'm not just talking about that. We used to do that in just casual conversation. Even in that, I've noticed that people are taking severe positions on the newspaper that they read. I mean, it's just insane. It really is. And that might be what's growing, is that level of insanity, but it's because of this constant engagement with dukkha. It's all we're focused on. We're missing, and again, the rhetoric in the world, not just the political rhetoric, we're missing just talking about the incredible experience of having a human life. And the elements of dukkha are part of that whole incredible experience, aren't they? By me saying that I don't want any of that part of life is a denial of life itself. It's simply what occurs. And guess what? We still live in a world that is rooted in ignorance and prone to greed, aversion, and deluded thinking. That's what the Buddha discovered 2,600 years ago, and he found the solution to it. We are so grateful. I am. The most fortunate thing to me in my life, besides my parents, is coming across this Dhamma. Because despite how excited I get up here at times, it's brought a measure of calm and peace to my mind that I couldn't even have imagined until you experience it. Boy, what a talk on hindrances, huh?
What do you
And
always?
what-
What's the thing that you say? This is not. It's something, but it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, this is a practice of ease and joy, but it's not for the faint of heart. And it's true. It's true.
It'd be so easy to come in here and take all the things that get said in here personally, but we've learned that you don't.
Yeah.
If anybody takes pot shots at anybody else,
No.
we're all pretty much understanding because we all have our sack of karmic stuff hung over our shoulder.
Yeah. Well,
Nobody's nasty.
and we stay focused on.
That demonstration. Everybody was very laid back, very peaceful. They were into having the information get out there, and there's sources if you want to be involved. It was pretty laid back.
You know,
That was close.
not not to keep going on this. I think the problem with that might be that it could never happen in today's rhetorical environment. If you're going to have someone speaking about how awful the immigration thing is and that whatever their position might be, you really owe it to yourself and to everyone else here to have someone with a different point of view, because that's the only way we're going to. But we don't do that, do we? We deny because we're so. Because as a society we're so protective now of my salvific view. I'm right. Everybody else is evil. You don't give evil the opportunity to talk, do you? But if you stop seeing the other side as evil, two sides might be able to come together, but not in the way that we are today. And again, Jay, I know I realized that years ago because I grew up like most of us in the Vietnam era and some other things that were going on, and I was a big protester. Even when I was 12 or 13 years old, I used to sneak on a train and go into New York. I've told the story about the war protests and how that ended. But what I also realized is that and I think I was only about 17 or 18 when I thought of this, that wait a minute, I'm only exposing myself and involved with and associating myself with one point of view. And I didn't feel that was very healthy for me. And so I started looking for venues where people had a discussion rather than a protest. And there actually were some of those back then. They weren't. One of the great war protesters organized one. I can't think of his name now. Yeah. But he organized a conference between him and people like him, which was me, and actual generals that were.
The Berrigan brothers, maybe?
Was it Daniel Berrigan? I think it was. It was so long ago. And he was about as radical as you could get. Yet he understood that let's hear what they have to say. Let's hear why we have war instead of, again, I'm getting off on my high horse again. But isn't that, it doesn't, listening to someone about why we might have to go to war doesn't justify war. It doesn't make me a warmonger. It makes me interested in understanding why. And the same thing about any other. I grew up in a world that you couldn't even admit to being gay back then. You were more likely to get beaten and maybe beaten to death. I mean, this is not that long ago, 50 years ago, 40 years ago. And I remember even when I was young, I read two books that had such a powerful influence on me. One was that Black Like Me, and I can still remember the guy's name. And Mary, I'm sorry if I
can't remember.
It was a brilliant, yeah. And about the same time, I found that this book and this other book in a pharmacy in Berkeley Heights. I still remember where that was. The other book I read around the same time was The Boys in the Band. And I grew up in a loving family that and a society that if you were gay, you were about as sick as you could get. And so I remembered that I still remember this. There was a guy in school that would talk about this. Like he would actively talk about using the F word and the other words in referring to. And I sat down and I wanted to ask him, why do you feel this way? Why do you think that? And he gave me this whole long Christian-based belief in why this. I'm glad that I did it because it made me realize that this person is just insane. There's no, really, there's no reason to give him any more credence than that. And so from that point on, when I heard it, and it continues to this day, but not nearly as much, does it, about bigotry of any kind, because I sought this person out to try and understand them, I realized that they're just insane. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're basing their whole life on.
Right.
So why should it bother me? And really, why should I do anything else but understand it? So I didn't have to hate. I won't say his name. I still remember his name. I didn't have to hate him then, and I didn't. And I don't have to hate anybody, and now even more so. I mean, I can't say that that's always been the case. I mean, I get on my high horse about a lot of things that were social injustices, but not anymore because I understand it. It doesn't mean that I don't care about it. In fact, I care more deeply than ever. I'm more saddened and upset by the increasing divide than anything else. And what really, I was talking to someone last night, what really, really saddens me is that it seems like most of our young people are just against. I don't have to say against anything, just they're against. It seems like we have a whole generation of people who are building their life on being against. And that's really hurtful, isn't it? Really, to me it is. We shouldn't have young people thinking this way, I don't think. We should be sending people out in the world with hope and compassion, maybe a little bit of direction rather than against. But boy, I really needed to get that off my chest this morning. I'm sorry if I got too far, but it does relate to this, and it does relate to not wanting to address these hindrances in ourselves. And the more we can diminish them, we'll simply be better citizens to ourselves. So let's go around. Lisa.
When you said that, that's exactly what I was thinking. So many different thoughts are just whirling around in my head. But at this vigil, they called it, I did not agree with everything that was going on. And I don't know what other people were thinking. There were different speakers, and they did come from different points of view, but basically, this would not be the time or place to have different points of view. This was just about, the ice and things like that. But I didn't agree with what everyone said, and there was some religion things and God and so on, but acknowledging atheism and so on. But what you brought up, that on liberal campuses, they have shouted down, and the colleges have canceled speakers because the kids there don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear.
Well, they've been guided to not want to hear it. They've been conditioned to not want to hear it.
Yes, I think there are a lot of negative influences.
Yeah.
And why is it the more liberal, the less you want to hear anything about what other people have to say? So people have been shouted down.
Did you just say why is that?
No.
Oh, okay.
And that politicians who were moderates have retired and left because they said because everything is just so extreme.
Yeah.
You were talking about that, that divide, the partisanship, but I don't really think people are any different than they ever were.
No.
People have always had, and I this is getting off subject, but I think people always tried to come up with something, maybe that's where religion came from, is to keep keep the aggressive and let's so-called evil side of being a person, down, and let the better side of us come out. Oh, so probably within the last few months, I was going to the bookshelf and I found an ancient copy of Black Like Me and I read it.
Really?
So I just read. I read it very, very recently, and it just was the most amazing book.
Yeah, it was like 1958 or something, maybe a little bit later. I think it was written.
But the way I could identify it is that, so he was trying to a white person trying to pass as black and see how you're treated, being a minority, Jewish. So I end up, interesting things happen when people don't know you're Jewish. Let's not put it that way. Okay, so there were some similarities there. It was the opposite though. It was the opposite of people not knowing and the things that come up. Because we can pass, because we're integrated in society here, and nobody knows what your religion is. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Thank you. I always thought that and I'm not saying this because I'm I was born morally superior to anybody else. I wasn't. The idea of seeing difference, I just could never understand it. I just couldn't, whatever it was. And then when I read many, many years later, the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, where the Buddha describes every human being is just this. They're made up of these 6 properties. Not one of them is color or gender or sexual, none of it. It's just earth, wind, fire, water, space, and the way you think, consciousness. That's it. And that's something maybe I kind of knew it back then, but that's what everybody is. And then beyond that, it's what we make of ourselves, isn't it? So, again, I don't want to sound too simplistic, because I certainly understand the roots of all this evil and hatred in the world. The Buddha described it too. But it resides in our minds. It doesn't reside out in the world. We create structures and systems in the world that support these type of things, but that's all rooted in ignorance too. All right, we'll quickly go around the room because we haven't done that yet. Jen, how are you this morning?
Oh, I'm good.
Somebody's here?
I calmed a lot off, and there's an opening just enough for you to get out because we can't have other people parking here for a public lot. So the spot will be open enough for you all to get out.
All right, good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You have a wonderful day.
Oh, is that because of Bastille Day?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Today is
The 14th.
If it was up to me, I'd let them park here.
Weekends or
I don't know if I have any.
Yeah, but I think there's
tomorrow's the 15th. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just bring it back to the hindrances, being helpful in recognizing anatta. It's once you have recognized the hindrance, you're pretty far into kind of joining with anatta, and
Yeah.
it's a good time to practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness. It's an opportunity to practice it, and to drop the story and just look at what is going on internally, feelings, thoughts, breath, and just be with what's happening now, and it'll settle.
Thank you. Eva, good to see you this morning.
I just, when I start getting anxious and restless and stuff like that, I remember that there are people like the Sangha out there in the world, and so they're still home.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we have developed a real refuge here, haven't we? We can even talk about these things without getting on each other's throats and all that. Good to see you, Anthony.
Right. This was great. I'm going to have to spend a lot of time unpacking this after today. We covered a lot of ground.
We did.
The one question that I had, I was kind of looking for a hindrance that didn't come up for me, which I often get, not just mental chatter, but physical sensations that make me distract me. What hindrance would that be?
It's just, you can classify it as sensual desire, because usually it's.
I'm not feeling sensual about anything.
Well, it doesn't. There's the other using that word, sensual.
Sensory.
I know you don't mean it. Sensual usually has connotations of sexual activity, but it really just means anything that is involved the senses. And so even in that case where I have my knees bothering me, and if I notice that my knees bothering me and come back to the sensation of breathing, the pain might still be there, but it's no longer a distraction. If I start getting into it and massaging it in any way, then that it's increasing the sensual engagement by whatever means I'm using to use it. And it's an intentional distraction, whether we realize it or not. It's a convenient distraction.
Yeah, because it doesn't happen off the cushion.
But that's right. And I mean, I hear that often. And some people will, that's where this thing about breathe into your pain. Okay, do that. But really what you should do is just be mindful of your breath and not let the pain distract you. Now, there's some times where I do a pretty good job of managing my pain, but sometimes the pain in my leg, this is lately, it just gets too much. And if it happens during meditation, I'll stop the meditation, do whatever protocol I can to diminish the pain, and I'll pick up meditation again.
Right.
Rather than insisting that I'm the world's greatest meditator and I can eliminate pain. Well, it's just that whole thing would then be a 30-minute distraction, wouldn't be? I'm trying to manage my pain rather than gently deepening concentration. And thank you for bringing that up. It's an important point.
Thank you for the answer.
Lisa, good to see you. We've missed you, you and Jay.
Good to see you too, John, and everyone. Well, when we come back, when I come back, I realize what was missing, and it's easy to get distracted with the world. And this was great. This is just great, and then I'm so glad that I made the decision. I want to go. I need to go, and so it's just like this whole thing and the whole time is just like, like a sigh of relief.
Yeah, it's a true refuge. We're glad you're back. Becky, good to see you. Missed you
Good
too.
to be here. Thank you. What Lisa said.
Yeah, I agree. Glad you're here. Hello, Nick. How are you today?
Well, I'm normal. So I'm thinking that one of the things that I have read many times is people think that we are much worse off now. There's more murders, more rapes, more things happening today than there was years ago. And the actual statistics show there's actually less.
Yep.
Less and less. What the difference is that the coverage of all these things is now 600 times more than it was.
Yep. And it's everywhere.
And it's available everywhere.
And it's everywhere.
It's in your
Now,
hands.
so I'm thinking to myself, well, that's what's causing our stress. I mean, that's what causes our stress. So much more stress. But then we have people that aren't bombarded with all this information. Okay, so little boy who lives out in the jungle. Is he bombarded? He's not bombarded with all this information. So I'm thinking, well, we aren't all in this stressful situation. But so then I thought, well, okay, I have two little boys. One little boy is worried that he wasn't good enough to get his new Nintendo for Christmas. Okay. The other little boy is worried that he's going to get eaten by a lion when he's going down to get water into that river. Which one of them has more stress?
Why is the I don't mean this to be dismissive of you. Why is it important to know? The Buddha teaches there is stress.
There is stress. You're right.
And it arises from ignorance of the way things are. Now, you gave an example, though. The kid that wants to go get a drink of water from the river and there's tigers in the area, that's useful mindfulness. It's reasonable to think that way and to be cautious. But if he took it to the extreme that I'm so full of fear I can't do it, he's going to dehydrate and die, won't he? So the stress is there. The stress is exemplified by the tiger or the lion. I'm not sure what you said. Where the other boy is manufacturing the stress, but it's still stress. That they're arising from different places doesn't matter. In fact, it's what that incredible statement that the Buddha gave that covers everything, doesn't it? Dukkha arises. And it arises because of ignorance of Four Noble Truths. You bring up a good point, and the answer is it's stress.
One more thing.
Sure.
You just talked about PTSD. I think to myself, maybe that's one of my problems. The situation that I had was so traumatic.
Yep.
That it put me in that kind of state.
I think, yes. I think you do, if you haven't already, just look at the typical symptoms of someone with PTSD, and you may notice it in yourself. And it doesn't mean anything, except that living in the world is traumatic. And there's different gradations of that too. What's traumatic for me might not be traumatic for you. But it's part of human life too. Bad things happen. Sometimes the tiger gets you while you're trying to get a drink of water, or someone you love. There's nothing personal about it. Jay, good to see you again.
Thank you. It's good to be here and good to see everybody. And I guess I go along with what I think Eva was saying. It's great that we have a nice bunch of people here that are trying to understand things, are trying to put our lives in the right way and thinking a better way and so on. So that's a good.
Yeah, I think so too. Glad you're here. Mary, good to see you.
Good to be here. I always still find it remarkable that these teachings are so relevant, that they were so carefully thought out, that even in this crazy world that we're in now, they all still make sense.
Yeah.
Regardless. I mean, they just make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. They're just as relevant today as that's why the Buddha called them timeless truths.
Yeah.
Meaning, he didn't call them eternal truths, meaning that they would go back into the annals of history, and they're timeless truths. Meaning, right now in this time, they work, and they work incredibly well too. If as Dhamma practitioners we believed in miracles, but the miracle of it is that they work, and it's up to us. It's not up to anything outside of ourselves. It's not up to any social position or who's in charge or anything like that. It works all the time. Kevin, good to see you.
Just echo everyone else said, thank you for this refuge. We can be our own refuge.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah, the Buddha's last words, it says it a few different ways, but he's pointing to impermanence. Decay is relentless. Strive diligently for your own salvation. That was such a radical statement during the Buddha's time, and still today, because most people will be told, seek outside of yourself for your own salvation. Engage in magic and mystical activities and all that. The Buddha understood that the cause of all human discontent lies within us. And we've been given these incredibly powerful but relatively simple tools to end the discontent, the conflict in our own minds. That's enough for today, isn't it? It really was a wonderful class. We'll finish with Metta as we always do. And just the 8 to 10 to 12 week series on the 3 marks of existence and really getting into what it means to encounter dukkha at the point of contact is probably going to begin in about 2 weeks. And we'll have a couple other important suttas before then. And the timing is probably going to take us right up to our fall retreat, which works out kind of nice too. For those that are going on retreat. So again, take your meditative posture, become mindful of the sensation of breathing in your body, your in-breath and your out-breath. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a remarkable class this morning. Peace.